This is the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast with me, Tom Evans. Welcome to the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast, where we'll be exploring all things sports psychology. Whether you're an athlete, coach, or sports enthusiast, this podcast is your go-to resource for understanding the mental side to sports performance. Each episode, I will be talking to someone from the world of sport or sports psychology to get their insights into the mental side of their sport. We'll delve into the latest research, share inspiring stories from top athletes, and provide practical tips to you to enhance your mental skills. Join me as I look to unlock the secrets to an elite sport mentality. Let's go. Okay, so welcome to the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast with me, Tom Evans. I'm the performance sports psychologist at Loughborough College, and today we're joined by Lauren Garner, and she has loads of letters after her name, which we're going to dig into in a moment anyway. But welcome, Lauren. Thank you for joining us. Lauren's the first team performance sports psychologist or first team performance psychologist at Sunderland, was previously Lead Academy Performance Psychologist at Tottenham Hotspur, which is where we know each other from my time there as well. And before that, you were the Lead Academy Psychologist at Blackburn Rover. So thank you for joining us today, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
No worries. So first and foremost, I guess, as I ask all the guests that come on the podcast, is that can you just talk me through your journey in sport and specifically sports psychology for you, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose my sport journey started when I was in high school, really, just recreationally more than anything. So I played on our school hockey team for 5 years. I played on the school rugby team for 5 years. And we did somehow manage to get that to a national level. So we did compete sort of, a relatively okay level. And then I actually ended up sort of dropping out of playing sport really, sort of through college and through university. And then sort of once I started my masters, then started getting into different sports. So got really, really big into weightlifting. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for a little while. So sort of in terms of actually participating in sport, sort of dabbled in a few different bits and pieces. But my journey into sports psychology actually was probably the most non-traditional way in, if I'm honest. So when I got into the gym, I decided that I wanted to be a personal trainer. So this was sort of back in sort of 2018. So I went and got my personal trainer for qualifications. Managed to get those within a few months, and then was up and running, working out of a local pure gym, Combe. So absolutely fine. Loved working with my clients. And then I started to sort of notice that a lot of personal trainers tend to just sort of expect their clients to, come into the gym, do the program with them. If I tell you to eat well and have sort of high adherence, and personal trainers tend to get quite frustrated when that's quite often not the reality of what happens, because there are underpinning mechanisms there, things like confidence, motivation, adherence, all of these concepts. And I was really interested to explore those a little bit further so that I could help my clients from that physical and nutrition point of view, also from a psychological point of view. Why do some clients struggle more, and what can we do to help them through that? So I decided to then go back to uni at John Moores to do my masters. And it was initially from an exercise psychology sort of point of view to help my clients through those sort of more sort of psychological struggles. And then, the pandemic hit. So we had COVID-19 and all of the gyms closed. We didn't know when those were going to open back up again. So all of my personal training work basically came to a very sudden stop overnight. And then started going more down sort of the sport route really, because at the time sport could carry on, as long as you were getting, sort of like COVID nasal tests. And I got put onto a sport placement with a amateur MMA fighting sort of academy. And I just fell in love from there, really, sort of working with, athletes, different challenges, So that's where it sort of started. And then from there, sort of just started following the trajectory down the sports psychology path, and then finished the masters, started the professional doctorate at John Moore. So I went straight into that after the master's degree, and then various placements. Really, I've worked in sort of like Olympic rowing, or sort of junior Olympic rowing, trying to get trials for Team GB, men's championship rugby, women's Super League rugby, and then, as you say, into academy football through Blackburn, through Tottenham, and now at first team level with Sunderland, really. So it was never really the primary plan, if I'm honest. It was COVID sort of knocked me off one path and I went down the other, but I've not looked back once, if I'm honest. I've loved every second.
Yeah, amazing. And there's an interesting thing there about sports psychology, and obviously the everyone thinks of maybe elite and performance element, but when I'm delivering workshops, the actual definition around sports psychology does involve the participation of in sport as well. So it's not just sort of the high end elite level that we're looking at. It is just getting people into to exercise in general, in sport in general, which you've obviously experienced through your work as a personal trainer, and then gone on to do the elite side as well. So kind of seen every kind of area of sports psychology, I suppose. So obviously now ended up in football, which is a like massively desirable area to work in. There's most people you kind of speak to who are training to be sports psychologists or training in physiotherapy or nutrition or whatever. Yeah, a lot of the time they do want to end up in football. So just kind of, I'm just conscious that a lot of people listen to this will either be athletes and maybe thinking about a dual career, and naturally areas in sport comes up. So sports psychology might be something they're interested in. How did you end up getting into that first step into academy football, and how could someone else sort of replicate that, do you think?
I get a lot of messages on this from students on LinkedIn. I'd say I get at least one or two inboxes a day, just saying, "Hi, Lauren, I'm really interested in how you got into football. Have you got any advice?" So this is something that I get asked all of the time as well, and my advice is always the same, really, in that football is a really desirable career. It's a really desirable area to want to work in. Because of that, it is just so unbelievably competitive. A lot of people understand that it's really competitive from a football player's point of view, getting into a squad and going through, academies and getting positions on teams. But I genuinely would say that it's equally as competitive getting a job in sport that's not involving, being on the pitch and being a player as well. Whether you say that's sports psychology, physio, nutrition, sports science, other roles. It's so unbelievably competitive. So suppose if anybody wants to get into that, the sort of advice I always give is just go and get some experience somewhere. And when I say go and get some experience, just volunteer somewhere. And a lot of people think that means that you've got to go and volunteer at your championship level clubs. When we worked together at Tottenham, I used to get a lot of messages from undergraduate students saying, "Can I come in and volunteer?" And you look and you sort of go, "Well, you haven't actually got any experience, and this is a big Premier League club. You're not going to start there,
Mm.
unfortunately." My advice would be, if you've got a local football team that has, a senior team, just go and have a conversation and say, "Can I volunteer here? All I want to do is just observe, see things, understand the dynamic a little bit." You don't need to go in and deliver workshops, or, at that level, you certainly, you're not qualified to do one-to-one, so that it wouldn't be safe. But even just going and sort of watching and being around a training ground, being around a team, having really informal conversations, to say, conducting observations, and maybe just writing a little bit of like a diary or a journal in an anonymous format, just to reflect and mull things over, will have massive, massive benefits. If I'm honest, I feel that I got really, really lucky in terms of getting into football as easily as I did, really. I spent a year volunteering at a rowing club, a men's rugby club, and a women's Super League club. And I was just lucky that within the university, some of the lecturers had connections there and they were able to help me, get in that way. So that is another avenue in. If you just speak to your lecturers, they might just know somebody to sort of say, we've got a student, could they come and do a day a week where they just watch really and pick your brains every now and then. That's a really sort of useful way to get in there as well. And that's exactly how I started my journey, not in football. And then I saw the job come up for Blackburn Rovers. It was part-time initially. My supervisor sent it to me and said, I think you'd be really, really good for this. If I'm honest, at the time, I thought, oh, that's a bit out of my depth. I'm not even, well, I say a year voluntary. It was 10 months voluntary, really, by the time I got the job. I thought, am I ready for this? But I am so, the type of person where if an opportunity comes up, I grab it with both hands and sort of cross that bridge when I get there, really. So I applied for it. They liked something about the application, so I got invited for it was a full assessment day, wasn't even an interview. I was there from
Wow.
9 till 5 in the morning. Yeah, and I had to do like various tasks. And it was very real world. It was very applicable to the work that we do as a sports psychologist. So it was probably one of the best interviews I've ever had, to be honest. Um, so that was between I think there was 7 of us at the start of the day, and then halfway through the day, they said we're only going to keep 3, maybe 4. We'll see. So we were all sat in a boardroom, and one person gets called after lunch and they don't come back, and you go, okay, they've not made it through.
Wow.
And then someone else gets called back, and they come back, and you go, okay, you're through to the second half of the day. And 3 people have made it through, and I was the last one to be called. And I was thinking, well, they said they were going to take 3. Probably not got through here. Never mind, I've turned up and gave it a go. And then they said to me, no, we'd actually love for you to stay for the second half of the day. So I was the 4th that they said we might take through. And then we went through the second part of the day. And then about a week later, I got a phone call to say that they wanted to offer me the role. So they definitely liked something. Um, I think at the time there was a sort of a good match between me and the other psychologist who was there at the time. So I was going to go in for a job that was 3 days a week. He was in 2 days a week because he worked elsewhere as well. And we both sort of had quite similar philosophies around acceptance and act-based principles. And I think because we sort of gelled quite well there and we had really similar philosophies, it meant that there wouldn't be a clash of philosophies,
Mm.
as there may have been if they'd have brought someone else in who had a bit of a different philosophy, really. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but
No, it's great. It's good context, and just to see how brutal it can be, and like I say, because it's so competitive, they can sort of be that brutal with things. And it reminds me, I watched NFL series called Hard Knocks, where they have like cut day where a load of players get cut and they get called into an office to either get released or get kept on. It's a similar sort of brutal nature to that. So just to touch on that, because I wanted to talk to you about your philosophy anyway, because people might not know listening to this if they're kind of new into psychology. It's not something I knew about until I started studying it, that not all sports psychology is the same. Like there's different kind of strands, there's different schools of psychology within psychology. So can you just talk to me about your like that acceptance piece that you were just talking about there, and how it maybe differs and to other different types of psychology?
yeah, so my philosophy of practice is something that has really evolved over, the last few years, really, since I started my doctorate to now. So I'm in my final year of my doctorate, so I'm 4 years deep now. And I'd say it's only really within the last 3 to 6 months that I've been really comfortable with where my philosophy of practice is at. So one thing I will say is that if anyone's listening or, who is already, in the early stages of a prof doc or one of the similar stage 2 training routes, or if anyone listening to this, that the college is thinking about going down that route, is that your philosophy of practice is very difficult it's a journey in itself, really. I'd say when I started out, my philosophy of practice really would be almost to adopt this role of the fixer. and a client would sit down in front of me and we'd talk about their challenge, and it's almost as if straight away I'd jump in and sort of go, I know the solution to that. Why don't you give this a go? And I'm the total opposite of that now, if I'm honest. Like my philosophy has completely changed now. I don't view myself as this fixer anymore. Especially if it's a brand new client that you know nothing about. I now operate from the stance of, well, we only met 30 minutes ago. Who am I to tell you what is going to work for you? Because we barely know each other. So my approach has really changed now in that my philosophy is very collaborative in nature. I definitely see myself as more of like a facilitator or a guide, someone to sort of help that person come to their own resolution in a way, or at least work together a little bit more, because my philosophy has evolved to actually understand the value of the client's input and their insights, and they know themselves better than anybody else. For me, I just like having those conversations to bring that provoke thought and reflection, and then we work together to sort of go down what they deem may be the best route. I do underpin that by ACT-based principles now. So ACT is what we would call a third wave approach, so sort of like cognitive behavioral approaches, where second wave approaches tend to look at identifying, unhelpful or maladaptive thinking patterns and essentially sort of changing them to something else, or to sort of remove thoughts and try to sort of get rid of them. Third wave approaches like ACT, there are others that I've dabbled in the past. I've did a case with a couple of rowers using a mindfulness and acceptance commitment based approach. And then for me, that was a little bit rigid in terms of it's very manualized and structured. And then I started exploring ACT-based principles, and recently have picked up a course which is around something called DNAV, which is another strand of ACT. So there's lots and lots of routes, but essentially it's all underpinned by acceptance. So my philosophy is that I believe what we resist persists. So humans naturally want to feel comfortable. We don't like discomfort. We like those feelings where we feel happy and content and excited. And the second, anger, frustration, sadness, disappointment, anxiety, whatever may feel unpleasant, we tend to go to this natural avoidance driven approach where we sort of go, I don't want to feel like that, I don't want to think this, I'm gonna push it away. And the metaphor I always use with people that I'm working with when it comes to that approach is, I always say, imagine that you're standing in a swimming pool on holiday and you've got an inflated beach ball. And the beach ball is your negative emotions and your uncomfortable or unpleasant thoughts, and you're trying to push them down. So you're in a swimming pool, you've got this beach ball, and you're trying to push it down into the water, and you're trying to hold it underneath the water. And I always say to them, do you think you could stand there forever holding that down? And they say, no. I go, exactly. At some point, exhaustion will kick in and you'll have to let it go. And what will happen to that ball? It will come up tenfold and hit you in the face twice as hard. So it's that resisting and persistence, and then eventually it blows up even harder. And the amount of conversations that I've had where people go, you're absolutely right. I've been fighting and fighting and fighting it, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And I've been trying not to think about X thought, or I've been trying not to feel X emotion, but it's actually having the opposite effect, because by trying not to think about something, you are already thinking about it because you're telling yourself, don't think about that. Whereas for me, I just believe that, we have a range of emotions because we're supposed to. If we weren't supposed to have these emotions, both the pleasant and the unpleasant experiences, we wouldn't have them. So, emotions are important, and instead of resisting them, an acceptance-based approach sort of looks at it and goes, okay, well, instead of trying to change the thought or remove it or ignore it, can we actually change your relationship to the thought or your relationship to the emotion, where you lean into it a little bit more? and you get curious about where it's coming from, and can you accept that actually it's quite a normal part of just being human. All humans feel happiness, excitement, contentment, but all humans also feel, disappointment, anxiety, sadness. It's just part of being a normal, functioning human being. And it's getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And we hear all of these things in sport. There's, those sayings that always come out, especially in football, get comfortable being uncomfortable, control the controllables. And I think ACT leans into some of those a little bit. Obviously, ACT is not about control, but for me, you might not be able to control your emotions or your thoughts, but you can certainly control how you respond to them, or you can control whether you open up to them and accept them or not, and control whether you resist them or not.
Mm.
So acceptance is all about adopting a little bit more of like a flexible mindset, and being open to all experiences, because you understand that this is a normal part of being human. Never mind a normal part of, being in sport and playing a football game, or, going and competing in gymnastics, athletics, whatever it may be. Sport, I believe, exacerbates these emotions. It magnifies them so much, because
Yeah.
when it's up, and when it's down, it's down. And as I say, being up and down is a normal part of life, but it's almost kind of like it's tenfold in sport. So I really think in sport it is important to get comfortable with all of those experiences.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And there's a lot of conversations that I have with some of the athletes on the DICE program, which I spoke to you about beforehand. So they're all 16 to 18-year-olds, and all kind of feel that they shouldn't feel nervous, or they shouldn't feel anxiety before they perform, or they don't want to. And that's a conversation I sometimes have with them around sort of accepting those feelings that are just part and parcel of the performance, rather than trying to resist them and hide from them every single time. And like I say, when you're early on in your sports psych journey, I definitely resonated with that bit of trying to be the fixer and having to feel like you have to throw these techniques out at people, and that's not always the case. And obviously there's no right or wrong answer. People who do different strands of philosophy and stuff like that within their psychological practice, that's brilliant, and it works for them. So there's no right or wrong answer. But yeah, I definitely resonated with that when you said that. So kind of with regards to that acceptance, what's the benefit from an athlete point of view with regards to performance and that kind of experience as being an elite athlete? Have you seen an impact on performance in the way that they can conduct themselves in training and in matches and stuff like that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, in so many areas, especially for youth athletes. So again, I'll link it to football, but I suppose it's relevant to every sport really. So just looking at my experience going through academy football, really, there's that's a really difficult journey for, any young athlete going through the academy ranks, because there's so many points where acceptance may need to, be brought in, whether that's, you're not in the starting 11, and that you're a sub, and that can come with disappointment. And then because you've not started, or you're sitting on the bench thinking that I can't really be bothered, I should be starting, but for whatever reason you've not. And then, you're coming on not in the best of headspace. You're coming on, maybe unmotivated, feeling disappointed, feeling frustrated, especially if you've had a string of games where you've not started. And then could that potentially have an impact on your performance there? Even if you're in the starting 11, you could be conceding goals, and you could be 2-0 down, and then again the motivation might drop, the commitment to high performance may drop, where you come a little bit caught up in the outcome, in the result, thinking, well, we're 2-0 down, there's 10 minutes to go, so I'm just going to fob it off. But actually an academy journey is quite a unique experience, in that you've still got to prove yourself as an individual to then get into the next age group and have your time at the academy extended, or get that next contract. So, if you've got a team of individuals who give up when things get hard, and they don't show that resilience, that persistence, that motivation, that commitment, all of those performance indicators, then, well, those desired performance indicators, then, what impact is that going to have on your individual journey as well? There's lots and lots of things, with international caps. you might get the call up to go and play with your international team, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be in the playing squad. And again, that's stuff that I've worked on with various athletes, where they've gone and sort of been, like, well, I got called up, but I didn't play, and I just felt, unmotivated. And again, so I think it's accepting. If you can accept these things, you can still have an impact on performance. If let's go back to the international duty one, if you get selected for that but you don't play, and then you're really unmotivated, or you're disappointed or frustrated, and then you show that through your behaviors, you might isolate away from the team, or you might not talk to people as much. You might look and be perceived almost kind of like you're throwing your toys out the pram. How's that going to impact you being selected next time, where you could get selected again, and then you might play on that camp, but that coach might look back and go, didn't like their response to that previous situation there. So yeah, okay, we might call them up again, but will it be a similar situation? Will they not be selected? So there's so many situations in sport. You might not get the results that you want. There's transition related issues there, where, or transition related challenges where, you might get released from somewhere, or, you might transition up an age group, or, there's just so much where psychology comes into football. I think two of the biggest concepts, at least from an academy football setting, that I worked on from a psychological point of view, were things like confidence. Confidence is probably the most common one, really, that I've worked on with youth athletes. And again, mistakes and recovering from mistakes, because every time I have those conversations one-on-one, or whether it's in a group around mistakes, people latch on to things, and they may have made a mistake. So we could use a goalkeeper, a really good example. Made a mistake and have conceded, and then you can see it sometimes. You might be stood at the sidelines of the pitch watching, and he's gone. They're not, or she's gone. They're not there. You can see that person is physically there on the pitch. They're stood in their goal, or wherever they need to be on the pitch, but you can just see it behind their eyes. You're thinking, you're not here. You're 2 minutes ago. You're trying to unpick and unravel what happened there, and now's not the time. Can you put that to one side? Can you accept that it's happened? You can't change that it's happened now. Can you accept that you've conceded and be able to move forward? And then that doesn't mean you don't care. That doesn't mean that you're not going to come back to it after the game or tomorrow. Just means that now's not the time to pick that apart. So can you accept it in this moment? Doesn't mean you're being complacent. Doesn't mean you're not bothered. Just means that you understand that you've still got however many minutes left of this game to go. And if you're thinking about the previous mistake, you're not thinking about what's going on in front of you. So again, you're going to slip up again and make another mistake and make another mistake. And it can become a real slippery slope. Whereas when we adopt that acceptance-based approach, tends to help people move on a little bit more, and then, come back to it tomorrow when the emotions have settled, the dust has settled, and we can look at this from a little bit more of a rational and less emotional headspace.
Yeah, and you can see like that acceptance-based approach, how that really helps with dealing with mistakes. And like, so me working with 16 to 18-year-olds, I think across all sports, but especially with young athletes, dealing with mistakes and then confidence is always the two ones that come up a lot. So how would this acceptance-based approach help someone with their confidence? What would your sort of advice be working with an athlete who does come to you with a lack of confidence? I know that's a massive question to kind of to unpick in a short space of time, but what would your thoughts be around that?
Yeah, so confidence means something different to everybody, and I really enjoy exploring that. So the amount of times they'll say, I'm just not feeling confident, and I'll sort of explore and go, well, what does confidence mean to you? And then I really like saying to them, what does confidence look like to you? So if I was going to observe you, because that's the only way we can make judgments on confidence. So, and I've had this conversation with coaches a lot, and I've had this conversation with players a lot in the past, in that an athlete may or may not feel confident. An athlete may or may not think confident related thoughts. So the only thing that I, as an observer, or a coach as an observer, or a scout as an observer, could judge that person's confidence on is what they do or what they don't do. So their observable actions or inactions on the pitch or wherever it may be, dependent on their sport. So I really like that question of, what does confidence look like to you? What is it that you're not doing that you want to do or you want to do more of? And it's a really nice sort of starting point to sort of go, okay, then you can start diving into, okay, that if you're not doing that, why are you not doing that? And then you can look at those avoidance driven behaviors. So I tend to start there, and then we have lots of conversations around how people tend, and this is not just football, this is a lot of sports. This goes back to my days as a personal trainer, where people go into the gym, and that people often wait to feel confident before they take action. But if you've never felt confident to take action, why would you expect that confidence to come out of nowhere miraculously just on, a Friday at the end of the week or whatever it may be? So confidence doesn't just come out of nowhere. So a lot of the acceptance-based stuff is looking at avoidance-driven behaviors, looking at where the lack of confidence comes from and the underpinning thoughts and emotions around that, and then having conversations around, actually, I believe that confidence is built on taking action. Confidence usually comes from a place where someone doesn't feel competent or skilled at something. So I've used an example before in a session where I've said to them, "Do you play guitar?" And they sort of looked at me a little bit confused and was like, "Why are you asking me if I play guitar?" I was like, "Did you play guitar?" And they go, "No." "Have you ever played the guitar?" And they go, "No." So if I gave you a guitar now, would you feel confident playing me a song? You go, "No." And I go, "There you go. It's because you haven't got that skill there yet. That's where it tends to come from." So we need to accept that we're still at that early stage of development with that particular skill or that particular thing, and sort of accept that and get comfortable with, going and giving it a go and accepting that you might make mistakes and accepting that you might feel uncomfortable. But instead of allowing those emotions, those unpleasant emotions of anxiety and fear, drive avoidance driven behaviors, can we actually start tapping into more acceptance based approaches? Can we start looking at your values? What's really, really important to you? And instead of allowing the emotions to drive what you're doing or not doing, can you take a more value and commitment based approach where you go, "I don't feel confident. I feel really out of my depth right now. I'm really, really uncomfortable, but I accept that. Accept this is new to me. I'm on a journey, and I'm at the starting point of that journey. I'm nowhere near the end. But if I just take action, if I just give it a go and show myself a little bit of compassion to make the mistake and to get it wrong, because you've got to get it wrong to be able to learn how to get it right, can you then adopt that acceptance-based approach and over time build that skill, becomes more competent at it by messing up, by making mistakes and learning from them rather than avoiding and running away from them, and over time build that skill of confidence because you've taken action, you've made the mistakes but you've learned from them, and you're just slowly getting better and better at whatever it is you want to feel confident at.
Yeah, that's great. Some really great messages in there. So, just looking again, we're talking a lot about elite sport and academy sport, academy football, but obviously the messages are transferable to whatever sport the people that listen to this are part of. But when, from your experience, and you're in a really good position to sort of make a judgment on this, I think, because you've spent time at academy football where you've seen players come through the system and either get that contract or get released, and now you're in the first team setup where you're seeing players coming in from the academy side and stuff like that. So what would some of the key psychological traits, skills, behaviors be that sets those elite athletes apart from the rest of the athletes that don't quite make it? Because they're all technically amazing, they're all physically outstanding, but then there's something that sets the ones that make it to the first team, get that pro contract, apart from the ones that don't. What, from your experiences, what are those kind of key psychological skills, traits and behaviors, would you say?
Think even before diving into this, well, I suppose it is psychological, but probably not one that people would expect to hear. I think people are probably expecting things like resilience and bouncing back from mistakes, and that is important. They are definitely up there. But one of the words that I've heard throughout my entire career in football so far, through all of the clubs that I've worked at, and even in other sports. This was a big word in rugby as well, is character. What kind of person are you? Are you a good person? Are you someone who lifts other people's up? Are you a kind person? Are you going to come in and be good for the building? Character is a big word that I've heard so much throughout,
Mm,
and I think that's something that people maybe forget to think about sometimes. Just are you a good person? Have you got good intentions? Are you going to come in and be, good for other people? Are you going to be that positive influence? And
mm,
if you're going to be a negative influence on other people, yes, I've seen it where technical and tactical ability have scraped people through. But again, it's quite rare. Football wants good people. Sport
mm,
wants good people. The world wants good people. So I think it's just that starting point is just be a good person. Lift others up and connect with other people. But I think from a performance psychology point of view, I think, especially if you're a young athlete, well, whether you're a young athlete or not, but I think it's more important as a young athlete, being comfortable and open to making mistakes. And when you make a mistake, being open to reflecting on that. But timing is everything with that. When you're in the middle of a game or the middle of, a training session or a competition, you can do that tomorrow when you get home. Don't even do it the same day, is my advice, because the emotions need time. I say to people, go away from it, sleep on it, and let's come back from a more constructive mindset, because you're going to go home and you're going to attack it from a critical mindset. You're going to rip yourself apart, and that's actually going to destroy your confidence as well. So I'd
mm.
say when it comes to, like, be open to reflection, but try to make your reflection constructive rather than critical. So don't tear yourself apart. The sort of things I've worked on in the past with athletes is actually start from a strengths-based approach. So
Mhm.
what were your strengths? What did you do really, really well? Because ultimately, to improve performance, everybody looks for their weaknesses and what they can get better at. Actually, can you double down on your strengths? Can you show more of that? So start from that strengths-based approach and then think, okay, what didn't go so well? What didn't go to plan, and why? And maybe where do I need to do a little bit of work? And then the key part is, how am I going to do that? So it's all well and good knowing where you need to improve and what you need to work on, but how are you going to do that? What are you going to do about it over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Maybe spend a month on it. So in football, like, that could be something as simple as long or short passing. It just wasn't great for that game. I felt like it cost us. It could be something around like communication. I went really, really quiet. What am I going to do to work on that? What are maybe some small little goals that I'm going to set myself for the next month's worth of games and training sessions to practice that skill, to become more competent at it and continue reflect, review, go again. Um, so I think that openness to mistakes, pairing the mistakes with a constructive, reflective process is something that's really, really important. And then underpinning all of that is resilience, is acceptance, is confidence. So all of these concepts really begin to, we start seeing them sort of piece together and be really tightly sort of woven in with each other. And that's what makes
Mm.
sports psychology so complex, is that people talk about things like confidence, but what other, mechanisms are actually at play here at the same time?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so again, it's a bit of a long-winded answer and a really, really tough one to pick apart, if I'm honest. But
No,
hopefully
no,
that
it's
just gives a
brilliant.
little bit of an idea.
Yeah, I love the character one because before we started recording, we were talking about a couple of players that have made it into the first team, and we weren't talking about their technical ability, their physical ability. We were talking about how good of lads they are, and that's that kind of really good message, I think, to for people to take away. And this podcast has been really good so far because everything you've kind of give me a lesson on things throughout as well, on things that I can learn from, and hopefully people listening can take away loads of kind of bits away from it. But kind of last question, and you've kind of touched on it already, so I don't if it's an answer that you've already given previously, but I always want someone there to be sort of a takeaway message. So something someone listening could go away, an activity they could do, or a takeaway that they could take from the podcast. And normally it's around building that kind of elite sport mentality, or building that kind of making them more psychologically strong, but maybe honing into that acceptance based. What if someone's listening to this and really kind of likes the idea of sort of adopting that acceptance based approach in their practice? What would be one thing that you get them to go away and start doing on the back of listening to this?
Probably two things, to be honest. So I think just being open to accepting that things go wrong. No sport journey is straightforward or linear. It's very up and down, and sort of having in the back of your mind sometimes that sort of acceptance of what will be kind of thing. And that's not me saying get complacent and take your foot off the gas. What I mean by saying what will be is you will make mistakes, you will have hiccups, you will have speed bumps, you will have challenges, things will go wrong. That's okay, that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
No human being is perfect. So just being open to acceptance is probably a really good start, and a willingness to feel what you feel, really, rather than running away and avoiding it. I think one thing that probably help with that is something that's quite tangible is just touching back on that reflection piece, really. So if you're an athlete within any sport and you have a training session or a competitive, session, whether that's a football match or a competition elsewhere, get really good with your reflection. So afterwards, give it 24 hours, even if it went really well, whether it went well or whether it didn't. Get really good at having a really constructive, reflective practice. So I used to give academy players like a template worksheet, and it had 4 boxes in it. And again, all things I've touched on, where they used to basically write the date, what game it was, or what training session it was, who they played, or a little bit of background on it. So kind of creating a little bit of a diary so they could go back and look through it. So they put the competition or training session details down, and then we'd start off from a strengths-based approach. So I used to have a box, and it was tell me your top 2 to 3 strengths from today. And then the second box underneath is how are you going to double down on those strengths, and how can you maximize them next time so that you can carry them forward, taking a real strengths-based approach. Then the second half of it is what was maybe 1 or 2 things that didn't go so well today. Not everything, the first thing or the first 2 things that popped to your mind. Because again, if you've got 2 strengths and then 50 things that went wrong, that's not going to be good for you. Still being too critical. So what is maybe the 1 or 2 things that you think they were the most important things there that probably, didn't serve me well, or I just wasn't able to execute as well as I'd hoped to. And then final part is what you're going to go and do to go away and work on that. So you're now doubling down on your strengths and taking a real strengths-based approach to your next performances. It's underpinned by acceptance to go, I accept that I made these mistakes. I accepted before I even went in that I was probably going to make some mistakes, and that sometimes takes the pressure off. But actually, this is what I'm going to do about it. So now you're building confidence because you have an acceptance-based approach where you're comfortable with the fact that you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay, and you accept that you're human and everything that comes with that. But you also know that off the back of those mistakes, you're not taking an avoidance-based approach. You're tackling it head on and going, okay, what am I going to do about it though? Because for me, I absolutely love making mistakes because it shows the gaps in my ability. And when I know what the gaps in my ability are, I can go and work on the gaps and slowly start plugging the gaps and getting better and better and better. If you don't know what you need to get better at, you're never going to get better. So you have to make mistakes. And I think, ultimately it comes from, can you be open to it? Can you accept it? Can you show yourself a little bit more compassion when it comes to making mistakes? And can you be really, really good and constructive with your reflection rather than avoiding, or rather than just tearing yourself apart?
Yeah, lovely. That's brilliant. Thanks so much for joining us, Lauren. I always love talking to you. It's like I say, it's always a bit of a lesson for me, and takes me to school a little bit of things I can kind of go and learn about and implement into my practice as well. So hopefully that people who are listening have taken plenty away from it as well. But thank you so much for your time today.
Yep, thank you very much for having me. It's been a great opportunity. I've had fun.
Perfect. This has been the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast with me, Tom Evans, and Lauren Garner. Goodbye.